Hello and welcome to the Japan Society. I'm Daniel Rosenblum, Director of the Corporate Program, and today I'm talking with Michael Green about North Korea. Michael is the Japan Chair at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington. He's also Associate Professor at Georgetown University. Well, welcome, Michael.
Thank you.
It seems in the past few weeks we've seen an intensification of bellicose noise and action from Pyongyang. Why is this happening now?
Well, in one sense, this has been a long time coming. North Korea has been after nuclear weapons, building long-range and medium-range missiles and trying to marry the two together so they can put the weapons on missiles for a long time, decades. There's an intensity to it now that defies expectations. It probably is a combination of factors. There's the succession issue. Who will replace Kim Jong-il? His third son, Kim Jong-un, is likely to take the job, but he's in his 20s, he's inexperienced, and in any succession struggle, in any communist or totalitarian system, you expect a certain bellicosity as they cover themselves during the succession. They may also be looking at a new administration coming in Washington, untested, and badly burdened with a lot of difficult challenges in the financial crisis, Afghanistan, Iraq, and so forth, and see an opportunity in that. Bottom line is they've wanted nuclear weapons and they're going for it now. They see, for whatever reason, that this is the timing to establish themselves as a nuclear weapons state if they can.
I see that the UN has established a new round of sanctions, but it seems that in the past the sanctions have not had any effect at all. Well, how about this current round?
Well, the last time North Korea tested nuclear weapons, in 2006, the Security Council unanimously passed sanction package under 1718, Resolution 1718. It was very tough on paper, and it was never implemented because the US, China, South Korea decided that we should give one more chance at diplomacy, and we entered into this process of negotiations and decided not to implement the sanctions, which I think was a huge mistake, which Japan thought was a huge mistake, and which we now know in retrospect was a huge mistake because the North Koreans went ahead, in spite of our concessions, saw the lack of pressure and sanctions as weakness and moved ahead with nuclear tests again. The new sanctions package that is passed is a little bit more detailed, has a little bit more teeth. The important thing is that they implement it. If we implement even half of what was on the books a few years ago, it will have some real bite in North Korea. And I think the administration, and certainly Japan and Korea this time, with the new, more conservative government, are ready to do that, and maybe even China as well.
Well, what does happen, though, if the next round of sanctions do prove to be ineffective? What are the policy options that remain?
Well, if we define success as getting North Korea to scream uncle, to say we give up and dismantle the nuclear programs, we will probably be disappointed. They can take a lot of pain, and they are determined to have nuclear weapons, which they see as essential to regime survival. That, in the near term at least, may be a goal that's not achievable. But the sanctions will have several other important effects which we need. One is it will signal countries like Iran, which is at a crossroads, we can still stop their program, or other countries that there are consequences if you go down this path. Secondly, we can constrict, constrain, and slow down North Korea's ability to procure technology, parts, chemicals, and so forth that they need to continue working on their missiles and their nuclear weapons. We can really constrict that trade with inspections and other actions. And third, we will be demonstrating to North Korea that the further they go down this path, the more isolated they will be, the more difficult it will be. And that puts us in a better position eventually to begin the process of negotiating an end to nuclear weapons. That last part will be hard right now, negotiating an end to nuclear weapons. Most people involved think they're just not serious. But by showing them we're serious, we create the conditions where somewhere down the road we can return to that process.
It doesn't sound like you think that a military confrontation is probable.
We certainly, in the US, in Japan, Korea, China, none of us want it. I mean, this is a country, North Korea, with 11,000 artillery tubes and missiles aimed at South Korea, over 200 Nodong missiles aimed at Japan, chemical and biological weapons. Very ugly. On the other hand, we have to be prepared for it. North Korea's tactic is to meet pressure with bellicosity, threats, and sometimes their own pressure back. And the danger of miscalculation or of North Korea overreaching because of the succession uncertainty is there. So I think we have to be prepared with missile defenses, with closer talks and defense cooperation, just in case, because you can't completely rule out something like conflict with North Korea.
Well, Japan announced plans for a missile early warning system, The threat of North Korea continues. Do you see Japan shifting away from Article 9 and even thinking of adopting nuclear weapons as a defensive?
Japan has been steadily shifting away from the so-called Yoshida Doctrine, the tight interpretation of Article 9 that Japan can't engage in certain activities. Japan has been pushing that envelope for decades. And part of that is generational change. Part of it is that the original architects of Article 9, like Yoshida, didn't think it would last forever. And a large part of it is North Korea and China are driving Japanese leaders to think about security in more realistic terms. But I think that's going to be incremental. I mean, even after the North Korean nuclear test in 2006, 80% of Japanese said they should not have nuclear weapons. So I think nuclear weapons in Japan are a very unlikely option. I think we'll see incrementally more efforts to increase defense capabilities, but not nuclear weapons. And even the defense budget is not growing in Japan. It's essentially flat. So it's more about authorizing the defense forces to do more, cooperating more with the U.S., making sure that the defense capabilities they have are more effective, which they need to be, given what North Korea is up to.
How does the situation with North Korea argue for or against Japan's desire for become a permanent member of the UN Security Council?
Well, I'm not sure it has any direct relationship, frankly. To the extent it's driving Japanese leaders to think more about security, to loosen some of the constraints on what Japan's willing to do, it makes an easier case for Japanese diplomats in New York that they're ready to take the full range of responsibilities of a permanent member of the Security Council. Has that indirect effect. But I'm not sure it convinces the rest of the world that it's time for Japan to be on. The U.S. supports and should support Japan's bid for a Security Council seat. My own personal view is it's a very, very tough thing to actually revise and reform the Security Council. And one thing that the foreign ministry in Japan should be asking itself is, given all of these challenges, is it the best use of Japan's diplomatic leverage to try to win this permanent Security Council seat? It's an open question, but I think that also has to be considered, not just that Japan is more deserving, but also is it worth it, given these challenges? Should diplomatic leverage, which is finite, be used to deal with the North Korea problem now?
Where do you think Japan is best in placing its diplomatic leverage?
Well, the alliance with the U.S. Is a source of leverage for Japan. It's a source of influence for Japan. And there are a lot of debates constantly about whether about whether they're too close to the U.S. or it's a waste of time. The way for Japan to have influence is to embrace the alliance with the U.S. and then do things to make us more responsive to Japan, to make sure that we're doing what Japan needs us to do to enhance their security. There's no zero sum. A close relationship with the U.S. does not hurt Japan's relations with Asia. So it's important to get past that debate, and most Japanese intellectuals and policymakers have. I also think that Japan's strategic view of the world has to take into account that its relative economic power is on the wane compared to China and other powers in the system. So Japan's going to have to tap into capabilities it has that it hasn't used. The defense forces could do more. You know, humanitarian relief, coalition operations. We're not talking an invasion of an Asian country. We're talking about contributing public goods. Japanese women are an underutilized resource. Japanese agriculture should probably be reformed to create a more dynamic, competitive economy and open up the opportunities for free trade agreements and more influence. There's a lot of residual stuff from the old Japan that gets in the way of Japan having more influence and power. And bit by bit, these are being addressed, but there's more that could be done. Security Council is an old goal. Japan should be on the Security Council, but it's very, very hard. And when you try to convince everybody in the General Assembly that you should be on the Security Council, you can't afford to make them mad about other things. So in some ways, it limits your influence on a lot of issues that may be at least as important as actually getting in the Security Council.
What impact, if any, is the situation with North Korea having on the upcoming general election in Japan?
Well, initially, I think it probably gave a little bit of a boost to the LDP, which is seen as more conservative on defense and more hawkish and more reliable in terms of managing the U.S.-Japan alliance. Whatever 1 or 2 million votes Kim Jong-il might have given Taro Aso have probably now evaporated, and his poll numbers are back down in the basement. And Hatoyama himself, the leader of the DPJ, has talked about revising the Constitution and has said things that sound reasonably realistic and tough to the general public, even though his own party has a lot of former socialists and people on the left. So, you know, elections in Japan used to be very predictable. Now the floating vote and the fluidity make it hard, but the signs are looking pretty good for the opposition, in spite of Kim Jong-il's assist to Taro Aso.
Well, Michael Green, Japan chair of CSIS, thank you very much.
Thank you.